Hi everyone and welcome. Today I'm going to do a non-spoiler review for the Farseer Trilogy by Robin Hobb. This is the first trilogy in a bigger adult fantasy series called The Realm of the Elderlings that is already completed and consists of a total of 16 books, which are divided into smaller series. Most of them are trilogies, but there is also one quartet. I have only read the first two trilogies, so 6 out of 16 books, which means that I cannot tell you too much about the overarching plot, but I also think that you're not supposed to know too much already, other than you are following people in the realm of the Elderlings, and the Elderlings are a sort of mystical species that you don't know too much about, but in each trilogy you do get to know more, which is quite interesting because they definitely are very magical. Now, as I said, the Farseer Trilogy is the first trilogy in this bigger series, and this consists of the first book being Assassin Apprentice, then you have the second book, which is Royal Assassin, and the third book is Assassin's Quests. These are of course the Dutch editions, but I think that you would recognize these English covers a little bit more. Now, I will go over the titles and why I think that they're not the best that they could have picked in a moment, but first I will go over the plot and what these books are about. In these books you follow Fitz. Fitz is a royal bastard. His father is the crown prince of the Farseer family and his mother is a peasant. But you don't really see a lot of his mother's side because the books actually start when he gets thrown in front of the gates of the keep by his mother's side of the family when he is 6 years old, because they decide that they're not going to take care of him anymore and he's now this royal family's problem. As a result, his father denounces all of his claims for the throne. He goes and lives somewhere else, and he is handed over to Burke, who used to be his father's stableman. And Burke is given the task of taking care of Fitz. Now, at a certain time in the first book, Fitz gets to know King Shrewd, who is his grandfather. And King Shrewd acknowledges that Fitz has royal blood, so by having that, he is a threat for the royal throne, he's a threat for his line. But he also realizes that Fitz is still young and that he can use him and make him loyal to this royal line and actually use him as a tool. So he decides that Fitz needs to learn how to be an assassin in secret and that his abilities can then be used by anyone from the royal line and used in their advantage. So, as I said before, you have these 3 books and in all of them the word assassin is in the title. And that might give you the idea that this is going to be a book about this bastard that all of a sudden has all of these amazing abilities and he's almost a hero, he can't do anything wrong, he's going to be the super cool assassin who's very good at that and it's going to be so action-packed, and that couldn't be more wrong. You're actually following Fitz. This is a highly emotional story who's being used from a very early age on. At the age of 6, he's already traumatized, he's losing everybody he's known as to be his family, his mother's side of the family, and he is thrown into this web that he doesn't understand, being so small. He is being used by everyone. He sees Burke as somebody who is given the task to take care of him, more than a fatherly figure in the beginning. He doesn't really understand what's going on, and I do think that he's heavily scarred by that. I do think that that's why he does make a lot of mistakes, and you start really feeling sorry for him. I've never been more connected to a character in any of the books that I've ever read than that I've been connected to Fitz. I've cried so many times reading these books. My eyes were just constantly puffy and red because you just feel so much for Fitz. And that's something that you definitely need to know before you jump into these books, that this is not plot driven, this is character driven, and a lot of the technical choices that Robin Hobb makes really even enlarge that aspect of the books. For instance, all of these books are written in first POV from Fitz's perspective, and in the first book and throughout you actually have some parts which are very minimal in italic, where you have Fitz as an older man basically explaining what he is doing here, writing the history of the 6 Duchess. But everything else is really back in time, first person in past tense. And that means that in the first book, Fitz is only 6 years old in the beginning, so you're really following a young boy who doesn't know what's going on. He doesn't understand the political intrigues, so you don't see a lot of the plot just because Fitz doesn't know a lot of the plot. And I also think that that's not really the meaning of these books. So if you're a very plot-driven reader, I do think that that might be a little bit annoying to some of you, because you're just not going to see all of those important stuff in the bigger picture, because you're just following Fitz and his story. And he's not one of the main characters in this big plot. He's really just one of the side characters that's just doing his thing here. And then sometimes he is being called by these main players just for their advantage. And that's when you see the bigger picture. But most of the time you don't, because Fitz also doesn't see it. But that does mean that you are highly invested in him, because you get to know him as a young boy. This is a coming of age story, and you just feel for him, and he's just confused and just wants somebody to take care of him, and yeah, you feel for him. And that's definitely due to Robin Hobb's writing. But as I said before, first POV does mean that you have other aspects of the story that just have some limitations. For instance, what I have heard a lot of people say is that Robin Hobb's, especially in this Farseer trilogy, doesn't write the best endings. I don't agree with that, but I do think that I know what they mean, and I would like to explain that a little bit more. So you have this first person POV, and as I said before, Fitz is definitely not the main player in the bigger sense of the plot, and you are following this little side character. That means that in the end of each book, he's not really there to view this bigger plot. And that means that in the end, you have a couple of pages where Fitz is telling you, well, and then that and that happened, but I wasn't there, I was over here doing this thing. And some people really do feel that that's taking a lot of the suspense away. Somebody on Discord actually compared this to A Song of Ice and Fire, where you have the Red Wedding. And he said, well, imagine that you didn't really see the Red Wedding happening, you just hear Tywin telling Tyrion about it afterwards in just 2 pages. That would not have the same impact as what it had then. But of course you have the A Song of Ice and Fire, which makes a lot of different technical choices, where you have third POV, you have different perspectives that you follow, and this is much more plot driven in a sense than what the Farseer Trilogy is. And this is not what the Farseer Trilogy is trying to do. So I don't really mind that these endings aren't the best, but again, that is something that you should know when you go in. That it's more Fitz's story, it's not the story of the Six Duchess, it's not the story of the royal line of the Farseers, it's Fitz and how he feels with everything that's going on. If we go then over to Robin Hobb's prose, I do think that this is something that everybody's going to enjoy. I've heard a lot of negatives about this trilogy, even though in general, let's say this is a very well-loved trilogy. But if we're looking at some of the complaints that some people have, people say that it's a slower book, it's not that plot-driven, they don't like all of the hardship that Fitz needs to face. But nobody has ever told me that they don't like Robin Hobb's prose, because it's just excellent. I don't think that anybody will dislike it. It's not overly flowery, it's not very whimsical, it's just good. And because it's not one side or the other, even though I love that overly flowery, I love Juliette Merlet's writing style, but I also know that some people don't like that. And while Robin Hobb is just straight in the middle, delivering amazing prose without having to be overly flowery or anything else, I do think that this is something that's going to be liked by everyone. So that's definitely something that's a big plus of these books, and that, if we go over to the Live Ship Traders trilogy, of which I will do a review soon, it's definitely the same there. It's just very high quality writing. If we then go and talk a little bit about world building, fantastical elements, and the magic system, then I would say that world building is pretty minimal in this first trilogy, but that it definitely ramps up later on. Of course, this is just an introduction in a very big series, but you basically start in medieval England. It's very similar to that, where you have a keep, you have a castle, you have the villages around there, and it's not really fantastical in any sense. There aren't any fantastical beings, especially in the beginning, that can change later on. But so yeah, it's pretty classical, traditional fantasy, but I don't think that anything is wrong with that. I actually quite enjoyed that it's not too much, because sometimes it can be over the top, which isn't the case here. You do have, later on in the story, some more fantastical places, because our characters do travel, but that ties in a little bit with what you will learn about the Elderlings, so I won't go too deep into that, but just know that you definitely have a little bit more when the world opens up in the trilogy. When we then look at Fantastical Elements, this is very minimal in this book. You do have, during the trilogy, some zombie-like people, but this is very minimal. It doesn't really come to the front, but this is one of the problems that is something that Fitz needs to face. So you do have that a little bit. You do have two interesting magic systems. You have the skill and the wit. And especially the wit is something that I really enjoyed, because this means that a person who has this ability can have a connection with animals. And Fitz is somebody who has this. Now, the royal family sees this skill as an abomination because they feel like this is, a man becoming a beast. So this is something that's looked down upon very much. So Fitz does need to keep this a secret, but I really like that. I like animal companions, and Fitz does have a couple of those. And because you are looking in first POV, a lot of the relationships that Fitz has, you have a one-way street. You see Fitz and that's it. But because Fitz can have a connection with animals through their minds, you actually see a lot of these animals as well through Fitz in a more intimate way than he has a connection with people. So I really liked that addition in the story, that you have a first POV story, but you still have some characters that you have a more close connection with. So that's definitely very interesting. Then the other magic system that you see is the skill. This is actually something that the Farseers, so the royal family, have, but you also need to train this. So there is a very small part of training school going on as well in these books, where Fitz is also being trained in this. And this is actually that you have, again, some sort of telepathical connection with someone else, but unknowing to them in some cases. In some cases, the two parties also know this. But if it's unknown, you can very subtly change the way a person thinks or change their actions. And this is something that the Farseers use in order to protect the 6 duchies, so to protect their realm. And I also really liked this magic system. Both of them were, very well thought out. There is also a consequence to each of them, which I really like. I always like when a magic doesn't just come without any effort from the person who is yielding it. So that's something that I really enjoyed. And as I said before, the animal companion aspect is very good. So if you like that in books, then I would definitely pick up the Farseer Trilogy. Then almost the most important part of these books, the characters. So of course you follow Fitz. I've talked a lot about Fitz already. You're going to love him. You're going to cry for him. You're going to be heartbroken a couple of times. I've never heard anybody say after they finished this trilogy that they don't love Fitz. So that's definitely going to happen. You're going to feel connected to him. But of course he also has a lot of other relationships throughout the trilogy. You first start with Burke, of course, who is going to be some sort of dad to Fitz, also a sort of mentor. You have Chase, who is going to be the one who teaches Fitz to be an assassin. You have Shrewd, his grandfather. You have Verity, who is his uncle. You have his other uncle as well, who's not that nice. So you have a lot of relationships. There's also going to be a small romance, which definitely ties into the coming of age aspect of these books. And I just really enjoyed how you follow these relationships from when Fitz is a very young boy. And this means that he sometimes has the wrong ideas about certain things, why people do certain things, or even if they actually did it. And that makes that there are definitely some consequences on how he views his relationships with these people, sometimes not how they actually are. And then when he's older, he starts seeing this in a different light and he understands some of these people better and the relationship changes. And because you're also watching everything through Fitz's eyes, your perspective also changes. And I really enjoyed that flow throughout the trilogy a lot. Now, you definitely have some antagonists as well. In my opinion, Shrewd is an antagonist. If you're a grandfather who uses your bastard grandson for your own advantage, even, sometimes risking his life, you're definitely not going to be the good guy, in my opinion. But you also have some other antagonists that I won't go into too deeply. But what's definitely going to be a limitation of first POV and following a very young boy in the beginning is that these bad guys aren't that well fleshed out. Because of course these bad guys aren't going to explain to Fitz, well, I'm a bad guy, I'm doing bad stuff, but this is why, this is, my whole life story. So you don't see that much. You definitely just have some darker characters. And why are they dark? They just are. It's a little bit, some characters are like Joffrey from A Song of Ice and Fire again. And you can definitely see why they would be the way they are, but you don't really get told that too explicit. While in other books where you have third POV or you have different perspectives, that's going to be more fleshed out a little bit. I didn't mind that because, again, that's a choice that the author made, and I think she deliberately made this. But that's something that you should know, that these bad guys aren't that well fleshed out. As I said before, you also have, of course, this animal connection, and I really liked how this was fleshed out a little bit more. And that was just, to be honest, the whole throughout the entire trilogy, that was like the nice thread that gave you a warm feeling, even though everything is a little bit depressing and it's so emotional, but that's a positive in these books. And then some of the relationships that Fitz has with some of the older characters is also just very heartwarming. So you definitely have some positive aspects here as well. Just be aware that you also have the negative things, and that not everything is going to go the way you would want to, and that Fitz is going to have some heartaches as well. Lastly, I do want to say that some people call this grimdark. I don't agree with that. I also don't think that the author agrees with that. And I think that they might think it's grimdark. Well, for them it is grimdark. I'm not going to say that they're wrong. But I think that they think it is because you have a lot of negative things happening to Fitz. And some of these are quite, I wouldn't say quite graphic, but you know, they are told sometimes in detail. But Fitz is a good guy. Nobody's going to say that you're following a bad character or a morally grey character. He makes mistakes, but all in all, he's a good guy with his heart in the right place, who's just trying to do good for everyone. So to call that grimdark, I wouldn't say so. That bad things happen to him, it feels more like you're watching a drama movie, but then you wouldn't say, well, it's horror because some bad things happen. That's going to be the case in most good books, I hope. That you have a little bit of tension and that you don't know that everything is going to be okay. So if you've heard that these are grimdark books and that's why you aren't going to pick them up, please don't really pay attention to that, because as the traditional definition of grimdark, I don't really think that these fit at all. And if you like the first trilogy, so the Farseer Trilogy, do know that you have two other trilogies further in the realm of the Elderlings that also follow Fitz when he is a grown man and later on. I haven't read those yet, so I can't really say a lot about those, but I have heard that the Farseer Trilogy is the weakest of all of them, even though I completely loved it. So, you know, I am getting my hopes up of those other trilogies. But, you know, be aware that you have in total 9 books that talk about Fitz. So that if you want to read more, you definitely can, and that if maybe you think that the magic isn't too outspoken here, I also think that this ramps up throughout the realm of the Elderlings even further. If you don't like the Farseer Trilogy and you want to stop reading Robin Hobb altogether, please don't. I would say try the Lifeship Traders Trilogy, because that's completely different, and I will also do a review about those books pretty soon. But I just wanted to say that it's best to read these books in order, if you can, because you do have some mentionings of what happens in the Farseer Trilogy in the Lifeship Traders Trilogy, and I think those moments hit very good if you've already read the Farseer Trilogy and if you're going to read everything in order. But if you just don't like the Farseer Trilogy and you're not going to pick them up ever again, there's really no harm done in them picking up the Lifeship Traders Trilogy. You can easily start with that one just the same. So be aware of that as well. So I hope that I gave a lot of information here and that you can now decide whether or not you want to pick up this trilogy for yourself. If you've read these books already, please let me know if I missed anything. I probably did, because it has been a while since I read these books. I also didn't mention some things, such as The Fool, for instance, because I didn't want to give too much away. So if you want to talk spoilers, you can definitely do that in the comments, but then just be really clear that you are going to bring up a spoiler. And then we can talk a little bit further in the comments. So I do hope that this review was helpful, and see you next time. Bye!